Welcome back to another day here in the garage at Basin Motorsports. So today we're going to try and answer the question of, should I buy or build the next engine for the WideFox? So lately, probably over the last year, you've heard me talk a lot about putting in a 408 Windsor into the WideFox. Now the reason for that was that I wanted something that was approximately going to make at the engine or the flywheel about 450 horsepower, maybe even 500, that was capable of really being a good autocross car or making the WideFox into a great autocross car. Now through a lot of research and talking with people that do currently race a lot of autocross or even to open track or those that build open track cars, the consensus was that the Fox Mustang really is not going to do very well with a 351 based engine. Now the reason is, even if you compare a 351 based aluminum block, which is a 9.5 inch deck, to a smaller block, typically the 8.2 inch deck, what you're going to find is that the 351 based engine is going to be at least or around 50 pounds heavier. Now the Fox Mustangs alone are really based, they're really based with the weight towards the front. So what you're going to find is that mine, being a coupe, is probably going to be weighted heavily to the front. So it's probably going to be like 55% of the weight is going to be over the front wheels or near the front wheels. Now next year I'm going to kind of work on slimming the car down, but once I have the roll bar in, it's probably going to be somewhere around 3,200 pounds. I want the car down around 3,000. I want to take as much off the front end as possible. So adding in an additional 50-pound penalty to make more power is probably not going to be the best idea. So what does that leave me? That leaves me going with probably something like a 347 that is capable of making 400 plus horsepower, maybe even 450, and it needs to be based on high RPMs or enough that it's going to be, I guess, durable enough to handle autocross or open track. So with that out of the way, you guys know that I've been doing some research for a 347, and I was trying to decide whether or not I should build or buy, or at some point in there, whether it's a complete engine, a small block, a long block, or just buy all the pieces myself and do everything here in the garage. So before we get to this point, I want you right now in your mind, answer your own question. If you're going to add an engine or put another engine in your next car, are you going to build it, or are you going to buy it in some form of a short block, long block, or a complete engine from intake to oil pan? All right, so let's think about this. If you're going to buy it all, let's say you're going to assemble everything yourself. So you're going to add, for a 347, you're going to probably start with either Boss 302 block. You might start with a dart block, or you can just go with a standard, let's say a good condition that's been Magnaflux in that small block that's already been bored out to accept in the piston size to equate to a 347. Now again, a 347, because of the additional stroke, you're going to have some clearancing around the bottom of the cylinders to be able to clear the rods. So factor that in. And then what do you think you're going to spend for that? So I started doing some numbers. It's like, okay, well, if I'm going to build a short block, what is it going to take to be able to do that? So I kind of looked up some of the major manufacturers or some of the major distributors in that to look for what's out there. So I've got a sheet here, which is my nice spreadsheet, which is build versus buy. And I'll kind of share with you some of the rough numbers I found. Now granted, these are not an exhaustive search to find the best prices on everything. Of course, around any holidays and that, you might be able to get a deal on stuff. So let's just go with a rough number, and then it'll kind of, I think at the end you'll be like, well, I understand all this. So for a short block, now a short block is going to be an assembled bottom half of the engine. So you have a block that's already been bored, it's been clearanced, a crankshaft installed with fresh bearings. It's also going to have all the seals, probably like the rear main seal put in. It'll have the connecting rods in attached to the crank, and then it'll have the pistons with the wrist pins and all that already in. So think of it kind of like a contained package that you've got there. No oil pan, freeze plugs it will have in there, but really it's basically the bottom half of the engine kind of put together. So the price I found for a short block alone was about $2,700. Now this is from a reputable engine builder, and you know, I think that's pretty fair considering they're going to have labor in to get all this stuff done. It didn't specify whether that was like an aftermarket block, like a Boss block, or something like a Dart block, but I assume it's probably something like that, or a very good conditioned 302 block that they've already bored out and done all the clearancing to. Now inside of that is a steel cast crank, forged rods, and forged SRP professional pistons. So inside of that, you can get all of that in basically a kit from Scat, which is $1,750. Now you can consider that out, the $2,700 for the assembled, $1,750 for basic components. You're going to have somewhere in the $800 to $900 range, depending on how you do it, of all the work that goes into it, with to recondition the block, to bore it, to hone it, put all your bearings in, measure everything out so that it's going to be all done, put new freeze plugs in and that. So think of that, $2,700, you basically buy a short block, or do you buy it for, let's say, $1,800 and you do everything yourself? You get your machine shop, whether that's local or not, and then you get all the stuff put together. Now think of the tools involved in this though. I only have torque wrenches. So for me, I'm gonna have to buy a ring compressor. I will have to buy anything to measure the crankshaft main section, measure bearings, measure bearing clearances. There's a whole lot of stuff I don't have, so I need to add in to build one engine now, because I don't plan on building engines for a living or really a hobby. I'm gonna have to buy a lot of tools that is probably gonna be a couple $100 at least to be able to put together just a short block. So moving on from the short block, we can next look at potentially buying just a long block. Now, I had looked at other stuff in there. I got numbers somewhere around $3,750 to $4,000 for a long block. So imagine taking $2,700 into a short block, or roughly about that. You might get that down to $2,000 if you're going to do all the labor, but then you add in a set of AFR heads, which is going to be somewhere in the $1,800 range. You're going to add in roller rockers, which for like a set of Scorpions is about $350. So you can add that into a hydraulic roller. You can add lifters with it, and the push rods that go into it. You can get those somewhere, I'm going to say, let's say $200. You can get all that stuff together. So you add in basically your $2,700 because you're going to pay yourself for labor because you need to do it equivalent. You add in another, let's say, $1,800 for the heads, a couple $100 for the cam, $350 or so for the rockers. So by the time you do all that, your total cost for a long block is probably going to be somewhere around, let's say around $5,100, somewhere in there, $5,100. Now again, that's if you're going to buy it from somebody else and put in the pieces to make the long block. If you're going to pay for somebody to do that, you're going to add in a few hours of labor, obviously, to be able to put in the gaskets and everything else. So don't forget you need a gasket kit for probably another $100 or so. Some head gaskets, some other pieces go with it. So you might be in around, $5,200 by that time. And if you buy one, you might be looking upwards of $5,800 to $6,000, depending on what they're going to charge to put together a fresh set of heads, put everything in there, torque it all down. And that's probably with torque to yield bolts for the head bolts, rather than putting in head studs in that, which are typically a little bit more expensive to buy. All right, so again, to add in the tools for that, a lot of times to add in heads and everything else, most of the time you're probably not going to do a lot of clearance checking. Now you might fasten the heads down to double check that you're not going to get piston to valve, which you can do that with simple clay and that, torque it all down, take it back apart, double check the thickness, make sure you're good by spinning the engine over. There's no real, advanced tools that necessarily need to be bought for that. So I may have those things already here, basic socket sets and torque wrenches, and I probably need a good set of feeler gauges, which I don't have. So you might add in, let's say, $50 or less than $100 for tools to be able to build a long block. So by that point, you may be into it, let's say about 5,400, maybe 53, somewhere in that range. If you're going to buy a long block, you might be buying it upwards of $6,000. So you can save yourself a little bit of money by doing it, or you can pay a little bit more to have somebody do it. Now the last question is, once you've either built a long block or you're going to buy a long block, do you want to finish it out? Now that from there is going to be adding like valve covers, an intake manifold. You may have a kit where you buy with a carburetor, a distributor, oil pan, and then you can start looking at your front accessories. You may buy it with a water pump, fuel pump already added if it's mechanical, or you might add some fuel lines or something else. A lot of variations there that you can put in. So what I was able to find is that typically a crate engine that already has like valve covers, oil pan, all that kind of stuff specified to you is going to be somewhere around $6,600 to $7,000, $6,600 to $7,000, and that's purchased. Now, granted, if you're already taking an engine out, you may be able to use a lot of the stuff you already have. Now, if you're putting on a good set of flowing heads, you're probably not going to put on a stock manifold unless it's been, like extrude honed or something else. A stock manifold is really going to choke down a 347 anyway. So you may be switching over to a carburetor or a much better flowing EFI intake. So at that point, you may be buying it anyway, whether you put it on or somebody else puts it on. You may be buying at least the top half, or they put the bottom half on or something. So long story short, you probably don't need many tools from that. By that point, it's kind of like the fancy stuff, the pans, the gaskets, the covers, and everything else. So there's nothing really to go on there, other than you probably need like some silicone to go on it. You'll need some red Loctite, blue Loctite, that kind of stuff. I would say the small stuff that adds up that probably never gets thought about, but you're probably going to spend a couple $100 in just assorted little things here and there to really kind of dress out this engine. All right, so now at that point, if you're going to build it completely yourself, you might be able to get out for $5,000 or $6,000 by really buying all the good pieces, spending all the time doing it yourself, and then you get to handle all the stress of the first startup. One of the things about buying a reputable engine from somebody else is that typically they're going to give you a checklist of things to do to make sure it starts up, and you seal the rings and do all the good stuff initially, and it's going to be covered by some warranty. A lot of them are now, a lot of the crate engine manufacturers are doing typically somewhere around a 3-year and 50,000 mile warranty. Now granted, I don't really worry about necessarily the mileage on it, because this last year I only put 1,000 miles on the WideFox, and that was just driving it around, cruising it up and down. So it was really kind of low RPM, steady. Once in a while some driving to show that I could get out there and get crazy, but it wasn't high RPM sustained for a long time, like up and down through an open track situation where you're going from maybe 3,000 to 6,000. Wasn't that, but either way, a 3-year warranty on somebody else's dime, as long as I follow the directions, would be pretty awesome to have. So the question is, should you build or buy your next engine? Now I asked this on many different social media, some forums and everything else, and of course the answers are all over the place, but as you can imagine, most of the answers were buy something. A lot of them wanted to buy a short block, because then the bottom half of the engine, which is probably the biggest risk, is covered. Most people can put on a set of heads, they can put on some valve covers, some oil pans and everything else. You can put on an intake. It's not that big of a risk. Just know that most manufacturers will not give you much warranty on the labor itself. So even if you buy a short block and something happens that you break a rocker or anything else, a lot of times you're going to fight it out with a manufacturer or a distributor trying to get parts replaced, even if it was a manufacturer problem. So the answer I'm going to come up with here is that I don't really want to buy a lot of tools that I'm only going to use probably once, and I don't plan to build a lot of engines in here. And if I have to do that, then I'm probably doing something wrong, or I've become so competitive in something that the tools are probably going to be worth buying. So taking all that away, it's a matter of should I buy or build? I'm going to buy. And the question is, what am I going to buy? Well, I'm not really looking for all-out power. Most people would say for autocross, some of the stuff I'm going to do, a Fox Mustang with 400 to 450 horsepower, even running sticky 200 tire wear tires with 315s on front and back is going to be a handful at 400 horsepower. Now again, think about 400 horsepower. You're probably going to start going through transmissions if you're starting to power shift them or anything else. So take that into account. You're going to have to do a lot of extra things to support that 400 with durability. The thing I'm probably going to do was based on a suggestion off of somebody that's built a lot of really high competitive cars, is to look at a Ford Performance 347, a circle track engine, which I never even thought about. But the reason was, as much as it doesn't make outright power, it has a great torque curve and it will sustain 3,000 to 6,000 RPMs for a long time. It's based on reliability and durability rather than straight out horsepower. So if I was drag racing, yes, I would look to put out a lot of power because I'm only going to need it upwards of, let's say, 10 to 12 seconds at a burst, and it'd be fine for street driving. But if you're going to constantly up and down and up and down and up and down between corners and constantly trying to get this thing shifting up and down through corners and everything else, you need to worry more about durability. So I'm going to go with something a little bit less horsepower, something that has a good warranty for reliability, and buying a 347 circle track engine. Even though I've got to change some stuff out, like the rotation of the water pump, it comes with a standard, which the Fox body needs a reverse rotation, and then I'll probably add in an aftermarket fuel injection system with ignition and all the other pieces. I still think that's going to be, for me, a better option to do. Be a lower weight than the 351 base. It will make plenty of power. It'll have a great torque curve, and it will be stone cold reliable that I can probably beat on it and probably not have any worries about pushing it pretty hard. So that's it, guys. Thanks for listening to me ramble. Hopefully it made sense, and I think this is applicable probably to really about any engine combination you can come up with. I mean, a Ford, Chevy, Mopar, even import stuff. At some point you can put a big parts list out there of all the stuff you want to buy. You're probably going to have it honed, bored, clearanced, all the stuff measured. And even the people that I know that have built one or two engines that bought all the pieces, most of the time they have told me just outright, don't do it. Just go buy one. Buy it from a certified engine professional that does it for a living, that can do it in their sleep versus being cheap and elsewhere. So that's what I'm probably going to do, is buy a circle track engine, most likely, put it in the WideFox, and once it's up and running and sealed up and going well, I won't have to worry about it again. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have a differing opinion, drop it in the comments. I really want to see what you guys are going to do. I know some of you guys are very good at building engines, and you're going to completely disagree and say, no, buy all the pieces, build it all yourself. And then there's some that are going to say, no, go get a short block, or some will say get a long block, but that's not really where my expertise is at this point, and I don't really feel like I want it to be in that area. So that's it from today from Basin Motorsports. Hopefully you guys understand the logic. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you agree, disagree, why? And you tell me. Buy or build, what's your opinion? And that's it from this time. We'll see you next time.